Hi, I'm Mark, and welcome to Book Ramble, and this one is about Pride and Prejudice. And I've gone up to volume 2, which is about 125 pages of a book 352 pages long. It was originally published anonymously in 3 volumes. In 1813, by Thomas Egerton in Whitehall in England. He actually ran a military library of all things, but he must have known Jane's father. The novel was originally going to be called First Impressions, but about a year out, Jane changed the title to Pride and Prejudice, and she sold the rights for £110, which in modern day money is about £9,000 to £10,000. Jane started writing this supposedly around about 19 to 20 years old. Not very old. Amazing. And if Virginia Woolf is to be believed, she wrote it secretively. She would write up in an attic or something, and if she heard somebody coming up the stairs, a creak, she would put it away. She was too ashamed to admit openly that she was writing a book, which was very common of the time. It was published first anonymously, which a lot of women suffered from, and then it became known it was Jane Austen. And again, referring back to Virginia Woolf, Virginia reckons that Jane Austen and Emily Bronte are the only women throughout the 19th century who wrote as women, not as a woman with one eye to the male-dominated market and so on. So a wonder in itself. Now I'm going to show you a little clip. It's from a film from the war years. You can see Laurence Olivier is Mr. Darcy. Those living at Netherfield and those living at Rosings. When you see this film, and the reason I'm showing it is consider the clothes. What era such clothes would have been worn? Typical man, boy. Now look at the women's clothes. To some extent, they're almost Victorian or mid-Victorian era, the mid-19th century. One possible reason might be that they had the only clothes that were available for the production. That's Mrs. Bennet. And there is Lizzie. She'll turn round to the camera shortly. A very old Elizabeth Bennet. What we have come to see is the Bennets, Elizabeth and her sisters, to do with really modern productions, modern films, and specifically the BBC production, in which you see the Empire line clothes. Now that's interesting because that's due to the fact that the book was published at that time and that era. And as you can see here, I've rendered a picture of Lizzie in that era and that dress, the Empire line. Very glamorous. Likewise, Mr. Darcy. Again, clothes typical of the 1813s, the end of the Napoleonic era. But that is how Elizabeth would have looked when she started writing. She started writing the book around about 1796 to 97. A wholly different set of clothes. Again, here's another one from a side view. Again, these are all rendered just to give you the look that in her mind, when she was writing, women and men would have looked like. Now, does that make any difference to how we perceive the films or the book and what people are doing? Not really. Here's Mr. Darcy, however. Completely different look. He's also got a wig. This would have been the ball. And again, nothing like what we've come used to. The men would have been in different type of clothes, wigs. The women would have dressed differently. People would still have been people. You get a different feel to it, don't you? And when you see these pictures. The time of the late 18th century, the 1790s, the morality and the way things were was completely different to what it would become almost 15 years later, around about 1813. It was becoming a lot more stricter, a bit more stultified in terms of behaviour and expectations of what a man and a woman should do. But this is how we've come to see Darcy now. Freer with the hair, wigs have gone out of fashion. So when we see Elizabeth in these clothes, she's a lot more freer than potentially it would have been when she wrote the book. So what do I think about the book? This was obviously chosen by yourself, viewers, and hopefully you, listening, voted. But if not, this was the book chosen for myself to read first. Because although I know roughly the outline and the story that's involved with this book, because of the BBC drama, I had never read the book before. And my daughter talked to me about it. And going through it, it's new to me. And I have to say, I'm very impressed. Really enjoying it. Volume 1 is of 23 chapters. And you can see the amount of notes that I've made. Sorry, I murder books. And there's a lot to say here. I just got a few notes that I'm going to talk about first. So it's obviously set in Hertfordshire, where I used to live. I used to live in Welwyn Garden City. So Hertfordshire is where it's set, know it quite well. A place called Longbourn, which is fictitious. Not sure the year in which it's set. So Elizabeth would have been writing in 1796. It could have been in that era, or it could have been earlier. If it's earlier, again, that's further back into the Hogarthian era. It would have been, again, a different type of sensibility. Short chapters, and they work very well. She does not info dump when she writes. There's a slow revealing of people by their actions, specifically Lizzie. And I've put down, is Darcy, and I think I may have been coloured here in my views by my daughter, is Darcy autistic? I don't know. It comes across as such, that's certainly the case. And I've made a major note here. Marriages, they're contractual. Very seldom were they for love, as we now understand it. And you get that in Volume 1 with Mr. Collins. I'll come to him in a moment. So Volume 1 sets up this idea that there's this property owned by the ageing Mr. Bennet who just loves to be on his own in his own little place, reading his books. And I can well imagine what they'd be like. It resonates with me. And he's got the bustle of all women around him, apart from the butler and him. There's no other males. And on his death, the estate will be lost. It will go to Mr. Collins. It's very important that they find husbands. Going to be spoilers here if you've not read the story. I assume that if you've come to the thumbnail and you're listening, you know the story. The daughters are desperate, especially the older daughters, Jane and Elizabeth. They need to get married. And Jane stumbles very early on into potentially a good marriage with a Mr. Bingley, who's very well off. Not as well off as Darcy, his mate. Elizabeth, because she meets Darcy at a ball, finds him very conceited, not for her. And I guess this is the pride and then this is the prejudice. The question is which is which, or is she both? The original title was First Impressions. And it was not a good first impressions as far as she's concerned with Darcy. But they're going to lose the property. And because marriage was contractual, when Mr. Collins comes to visit and proposes to Elizabeth, that would be manna from heaven ordinarily, because it means that she would be secured. As the wife, she would have control of the property. Well, not control, but she'll be there. She'll be earthed out and expected to live on her own. But she turns him down. And we see the contractual side of marriage when almost instantly Mr. Collins then goes off with Charlotte Lucas, or Charlotte Lucas gets herself in front of Mr. Collins to snare him. So it's very well done, very interesting. Love is obviously a key theme throughout the first volume. And for a 19-20-year-old, in the era in which she grew up, to have the insights as she does with people, especially men, is quite astounding. And she writes so very well. Beautiful language. And of course, none more so than the very famous first line. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. However little known the feelings or views of such a man, this truth is so well fixed in the minds of the surrounding families that he is considered as the rightful property of someone or other of their daughters. Fantastic. The wit that she brings to bear, this is Jane Austen now, I don't think we can underestimate it. It is sublime. And I agree with Virginia Woolf. The writing, if you read books of that era from men and women, like William Hazlitt, who's no longer now respected, it's a different style. It's a different way of unfolding of stories and the language, which Jane Austen does not have. She's very fresh, very modern. It has not dated as such. So kudos to her. Fantastic writing. And I can see why it was within 5-10 years, an instant hit. The first chapter is really about Mr. Bennet and his wife, and it sets up the idea that suddenly into their midst at another park, another house along the way. And of course, that's something we need to bear in mind. We're not dealing here with the very low class or the very high. This is the middle-ranking people. They may be quite well off and respected in their area, but money is always tight, and they're all in each other's midst because of the balls and walking back and forth into town and meeting people. We're not dealing with the servants here. We're dealing with a certain level of society in which the daughters can just sit at home and perhaps make some jam and do some knitting, but they're not expected to go out and work in the fields. And we get this wonderful opening on the first chapter, the first page. There's this conversation between Mr. and Mrs. Bennet. Someone's coming to the area. He said, "What is his name?" "Bingley." "Is he married or single?" "Oh, single, my dear, to be sure. A single man of large fortune, 4,000 or 5,000 a year. What a fine thing for our girls." "How so? How can it affect them?" "My dear Mr. Bennet," replied his wife, and I don't know about you, I can't now read the way in which these people talk without thinking of the BBC drama, Alison Steadman. "How can you be so tiresome? You must know that I am thinking of his marrying one of them." So it's a great opening. It's the Bennet parents. They are chalk and cheese. Really amazing. Supposedly Mrs. Bennet was a beauty in her era, in her own youth, but has grown up to be a bit of a, I don't want to say a scold, but a worrier. And again, this is a 20-year-old Jane Austen talking about a Mr. Bennet. Mr. Bennet was so odd a mixture of quick parts, sarcastic humour, reserve and caprice that the experience of 23 years had been insufficient to make his wife understand his character. Her mind was less difficult to develop. She was a woman of mean understanding, little information and uncertain temper. When she was discontented, she fancied herself nervous. The business of her life was to get her daughters married. Its solace was visiting and news. Mr. Bennet comes across as a great character because he says things as though he doesn't know what's happening, but of course he does, because we find out instantly in the next chapter that Mr. Bennet was going to visit these guys anyway, although he made out, I don't know who's in the area, who are these people? He's that type of character. It's great, and there's a wonderful scene that's in the first volume that I remember very much from the BBC drama. Elizabeth has turned down Mr. Collins, and Mr. Bennet says, "An unhappy alternative is before you, Elizabeth. From this day you must be a stranger to one of your parents. Your mother will never see you again if you do not marry Mr. Collins, and I will never see you again if you do." So, of course, in my mind, this is a story about how Elizabeth Bennet, who initially doesn't like or care for a Mr. Darcy, then forced for Darcy, and over time, they become an item. And we meet Darcy quite early on, and he's fine, he's a tall person, handsome features, noble mien, but of course he has 10,000 a year, which seals the deal. Looked at with great admiration for about half the evening, till his manners gave a disgust which turned the tide of his popularity. He was discovered to be proud, to be above his company and above being pleased, a most forbidding, disagreeable countenance, unworthy to be compared with his friend Mr. Bingley. Everybody hoped that he would never come there again. Amongst the most violent against him was Mrs. Bennet, whose dislike of his general behaviour was sharpened into particular resentment by his having slighted one of her daughters. So the setup is great, very quick, very succinct, to the point, and a lot of wry humour and insight. It's so well written that a lot of the scenes and even the words are used in many of the adaptations. I think in the film, it's the one where it said, "Your hands are cold." The scene is where they're almost like behind bleachers where people are sitting, and Darcy and Bingley come along, and we hear them talking just like Elizabeth and her sister hears them. This is Mr. Darcy speaking, talking to Bingley. "You are dancing with the only handsome girl in the room. Oh, she is the most beautiful creature I ever beheld." And then they talk about Elizabeth. "She is tolerable, but not handsome enough to tempt me, and I am in no humour at present to give consequence to young ladies who are slighted by other men. You had better return to your partner and enjoy her smiles, for you are wasting your time with me. Very memorable scenes unfolding, and it is amazing for myself, who doesn't really know the story in this medium, that when I read it, it's almost like I'm seeing the film or the BBC drama again. It's just fantastic. And there's this scene where Elizabeth is talking with Charlotte Lucas, about that Jane should make every opportunity to be seen or command the attention of Bingley. And I put down here battle plans. And that's Charlotte saying that. And Elizabeth replies, well, your plan is a good one, but these are not Jane's feelings. She's not acting by design. You get this idea that from the likes of Charlotte Lucas, they're going to do everything to get a man. And of course she does eventually with Mr. Collins. One thing I did notice, as you go through the book, there's this keen interest in money. How much are the men earning? So we know that there's 10,000 a year with Mr. Darcy. Chapter 7 starts, Mr. Bennet's property consisted almost entirely in an estate of 2,000 a year, which unfortunately for his daughters was entailed in default of heirs male on a distant relation. This is Mr. Collins. And their mother's fortune, though ample for her situation in life, could but ill supply the deficiency of his. Her father had been an attorney in Meryton and had left her £4,000. 2,000, 10,000, £4,000. They're always exact numbers. It's just... okay. So with the dowry, it left her, obviously the 4,000 has not been touched because it's still an exact amount. The sisters leave a bored life, to be honest. So when the recent arrival of a militia regiment is the main thing in that life, they go to town to be seen by the men going around in their uniforms. And that's how we get to meet Mr. Wickham, who at this point, yes, it's set up that him and Darcy don't get on with each other, but we don't really see that much about him at this time. But Elizabeth likes him. You also become very aware of the morality of the time. So there's this scene where Jane is at the Bingleys and she happens to leave the room. Now we get a top-down view here. Jane Austen keeps the eye on the room and all the people there as Jane leaves. She would not have known this, but we, the reader, knows this, that when dinner was over, she returned directly to Jane, and Miss Bingley began abusing her as soon as she was out of the room. Her manners were pronounced to be very bad indeed, a mixture of pride and impertinence. She had no conversation, no style, no taste, no beauty. Mrs. Hurst thought the same, and added, she has nothing in short to recommend her, but being an excellent walker. I shall never forget her appearance this morning. She really looked almost wild. And they go on to talk about the fact that to walk 3 miles or 4 miles or 5 miles or whatever it is, above her ankles in dirt, and alone, quite alone. What could she mean by it? It seems to me to show an abominable sort of conceited independence, a most country town indifference to decorum. So throughout, you've got these little backbiting, and of course, when it becomes apparent that Miss Bingley is trying to get the attention of Darcy and Elizabeth is lurking in the corners, then she clams up to make sure that she's the only one who gets the attention of Darcy and so on. So it's all about these pieces moving on a chessboard and how close can they get to the king. And the king happens to be the rich men, in this case, possibly Bingley or Darcy. And all of the queens, because there's more than one queens on this game, they're all trying to get there or crowd around the king so that others can't get to him. It's amazing. And of course Jane becomes ill and has to stay amongst them. And that's repeated respectfully in all of the productions that I've seen. And there's this bitingness that is very well captured. So there's a comment here about Charlotte. The Lucases are very good sort of girls, I assure you. It is a pity that they are not handsome. Not that I think Charlotte is so very plain, but then she's our particular friend. And that's Mrs. Bennet. Trying to lift up her daughter's beauty in front of a competitor. This is basically her talking to Mr. Bingley. And you get that a lot throughout the book. Now, I particularly love this era. I've written 2 books about it myself. So I'm very much into Master and Commander, the way the books lay out. Very similarly in the second book, Post Captain. A lot of it's on land, and it's all to do with Captain Aubrey trying to get the hand of Sophia Williams, and Mrs. Williams is just Mrs. Bennet, rewritten. And they're very similar. I've written down here the lounging of the well-off. They tend to, at night, just lounge around, doing a little bit of music, talking, gossiping, backbiting, and all of that. It just captures that time and place so well. That's not to say that Jane doesn't write with what I've written here, convoluted, wordy conversation at time. There's this conversation between Elizabeth and Bingley, Mr. Bingley and Darcy. And Elizabeth says, "Your humility, Mr. Bingley, must disarm reproof." And Darcy chips in and says, "Nothing is more deceitful than the appearance of humility. It is often only carelessness of opinion, and sometimes an indirect boast." And this is Elizabeth. "And which of the 2 do you call my little recent piece of modesty?" And this is Darcy now speaking at length, which he hasn't to date. And I've put down an arrogant prig. "The indirect boast," he says, "for you are really proud of your defects in writing, because you consider them as proceeding from a rapidity of thought and carelessness of execution, which if not estimable, you think at least highly interesting. The power of doing anything with quickness is always much prized by the possessor, and often without any attention to the imperfection of the performance. When you told Mrs. Bennet this morning that if you ever resolved on quitting Netherfield you should be gone in 5 minutes, you meant it to be a sort of panegyric, compliment to yourself. And yet what is there so very laudable in a precipitance which must leave very necessary business undone, and can be of no real advantage to yourself or anyone else?" And then they have this back and forth 3-way conversation between Elizabeth, Bingley and Darcy. It's very interesting. But Darcy, the character of Darcy, so well set up, because this is one of the most, I wouldn't say he's repellent. He's not reptilian, which is something that I'm just reading about at the moment with Andy Warhol. He's not like that, but he's rigid, self-sure of himself, dismissive of all the people around him who thinks below him. He's very well set up to be disliked. And then, obviously, then it's going to be the thawing of that over time. There's one scene, as soon as I read it, it's on page 52 to 53. It reminded me of, for myself, the most effective, most memorable scene in the BBC drama. There's this wonderful moment where they're all in this room and they're all doing their own different things. Mrs. Hurst sang with her sister, and while they were thus employed, Elizabeth could not help observing, as she turned over some music books that lay on the instrument, how frequently Mr. Darcy's eyes were fixed on her. She hardly knew how to suppose that she could be an object of admiration to so great a man. She could only imagine. She drew his notice because there was something about her more wrong and reprehensible according to his ideas of right. In the BBC drama, that's used as proof that they're starting to fall for each other, but not in the book. It mirrors the TV series slightly in the feel, but not the intent. It's very interesting. Darcy had never been so bewitched by any woman as he was by her. He really believed that, were it not for the inferiority of her connections, he should be in some danger. By the time we're coming to 3/4 of the way of the volume 1, Darcy and Elizabeth are at an impasse. And then it just proceeds on, which I won't go into because obviously most people know the story. It's a very well-written piece that really delves into the characters and the motivations of a set of people, a unique set of people who need to do unique things. One set, mostly the men, don't need to worry about money. Nearly all the women have to, and they have to basically get the attention of some rich man to make them comfortable. What really works, I think, with this first volume is Mr. Collins, who's not very old in the book. In the series, the BBC one drama, I Know More, he's fairly old, brilliant actor. Just the way he moves and his officiousness. Oh, Lady Catherine de Bourgh. It's just, I can't not read the words of Mr. Collins in the book and not hear his voice, the actor's voice. And that's very well done. And also how Elizabeth turns him down when he proposes to her. It's just amazing. And you do get a sense of, what? How proudful is this? Prideful, not proudful. How prideful is this? That's the tension that underlies Volume 1. Elizabeth turns down the sure way for her to secure her long-term comfort and access to the property that is soon to be lost if their father dies. Volume 1 is 2 bookends. We start with Mr. and Mrs. Bennet and we end with Mr. and Mrs. Bennet. We start with Mrs. Bennet saying, oh, somebody's coming into the arena. He's got 10,000 a year, blah, blah, blah. I intend to have my daughters marry one of them, both of them. Then it's this to and fro in, where could that happen? And Jane gets the eye of one of them. Elizabeth doesn't get the eye of Darcy at first, but then we find out that possibly is the case. Elizabeth don't care for him. She prefers another man, Wickham. Mr. Collins, who's going to inherit the property, comes along, is young, is a character. And he asks her, will she be his wife? And she steadfastly refuses. Now you imagine that time and place. For her to do that, it's just exceptional. And then that leads up to the denouement, which I'll come to in a moment, of the first volume. Charlotte, she ain't going to hang around. Her friend, she gets Collins, and the announcement is made of their marriage to be. Chapter 22, I think, is a key chapter because it tells the world, certainly Jane Austen's viewpoint of marriage, and potentially what a lot of people thought about at the time. She said, the stupidity with which he, that's Mr. Collins, was favoured by nature must guard his courtship from any charm that could make a woman wish for its continuance. And Miss Lucas, who accepted him solely from the pure and disinterested desire of an establishment, cared not how soon that establishment were gained. And further on, Charlotte talks about marriage. Without thinking highly either of men or of matrimony, marriage had always been her object. It was the only honourable provision for well-educated young women of small fortune, and however uncertain of giving happiness, must be their pleasantest preservative from want. This preservative she had now obtained, and at the age of 27, without having ever been handsome, she felt all the good luck on it. Not for love, just to secure comfort. And because it's been set up that this house is going, Collins has come along, he's not going to marry one of the daughters. Mrs. Bennet, as a knee-jerk reaction, as you would expect. And I put down here her paranoia. Suddenly, Miss Lucas was odious to her. As her successor in that house, she regarded her with jealous abhorrence. Whenever Charlotte came to see them, she concluded her to be anticipating the hour of possession. And whenever she spoke in a low voice to Mr. Collins, was convinced that they were talking of the Longbourn estate, and resolving to turn herself and her daughters out of the house as soon as Mr. Bennet were dead. And at the end she says, I can never be thankful, Mr. Bennet, for anything about the entail. How anyone could have the conscience to entail away an estate from one's own daughters, I cannot understand. And all for the sake of Mr. Collins, too. Why should he have it more than anybody else? And the final words of the volume, Mr. Bennet, I leave it to yourself to determine. It's fantastic. The language for a 19-20-year-old is exceptional, and the insights that she brings to bear in the story about the individual characters and the underlying motivations they all have is exceptional. So what we have is a wonderfully crafted piece of work that really, it's just a domestic drama in which Elizabeth, who becomes the centrepiece, although we start off with the Bennet, this property is now going to go to Collins, who's now chosen a wife outside of the family. And the two sisters now desperately have to do something to get married, and so the other two sisters who were coming up behind them. So there's a lot of tension here, more than you potentially would read into as I was reading towards the end, but they've got to do something. And it literally ends on a soft precipice overlooking an abyss. So it's very well done. Really enjoying it. I know the story, so I know where it's eventually going to end up, and I'll be interested to see how Jane weaves together in the second volume them coming together more, or is there some tension that's going to come in that will separate them, and so on and so forth. Yet to meet Catherine de Bourgh, and so on. Pride and Prejudice. Really good. Really enjoying it. So, ta-ta for now.